Operant conditioning is the basis for many of the most important kinds of human and animal learning. Operant conditioning is learning in which a voluntary response is strengthened or weakened depending on its favorable or unfavorable consequences. When we say that a response has been strengthened or weakened, it has been made more or less likely to recur regularly. Unlike classical conditioning, in which the original behaviors are the neutral biological responses to the presence of a stimulus such as food, water, or pain, operant conditioning applies to voluntary responses which an organism performs deliberately to produce a desired outcome. The term operant emphasizes this point. The organism operates on its environment to produce a desirable result. Thorndike's early research served as the foundation of the work of one of the 20th century's most influential psychologists, B.F. Skinner. You may have heard of the Skinner box, a chamber with a highly controlled environment that was used to study operant conditioning processes with laboratory animals. So, using Thorndike's law of effect as a starting point, Skinner developed a behavioral technology that revealed the principles of behavior control. By shaping pigeons' natural walking and pecking behaviors, for example, Skinner was able to teach them such un-pigeon-like behaviors as walking, playing ping pong, and keeping a missile on course by pecking at a screen target. For his pioneering studies, Skinner designed an operant chamber, popularly known as a Skinner box. The box was a bar level that an animal presses, or a key disc the animal pecks, to relate a reward of food or water. So, what is the role of reward and punishment in learning? Well, in operant conditioning, it is a form of learning in which a voluntary behavior is strengthened or weakened. According to B.F. Skinner, the major mechanism underlying learning is reinforcement, the process by which a stimulus increases the probability that a preceding behavior will be repeated. Primary reinforcers are rewards that are naturally effective without previous experience because they satisfy a biological need. But secondary reinforcers begin to act as if they were primary reinforcers through association with a primary reinforcer. So again, a primary reinforcer satisfies some biological need and works naturally regardless of a person's previous experience. Food for a hungry person, warmth for a cold person, and relief for a person in pain all would be classified as primary reinforcers. Now, a secondary reinforcer, in contrast, is a stimulus that becomes reinforcing because of its association with a primary reinforcer. For instance, we know that money is valuable because we have learned that it allows us to obtain other desirable objects, including primary reinforcers such as food and shelter. Money thus becomes a secondary reinforcer. Positive reinforcers are stimuli that are added to the environment and lead to an increase in a preceding response. And negative reinforcers are stimuli that remove something unpleasant from the environment, also leading to an increase in the preceding response. So let us unpack this a little bit more in depth. A positive reinforcer is a stimulus added to the environment that brings about an increase in a preceding response. If food, water, money, or praise is provided after a response, it is more likely that the response will occur again. The paychecks that workers get at the end of a week, for example, increase the likelihood that they will return to their jobs the following week. In contrast, a negative reinforcer refers to an unpleasant stimulus whose removal leads to an increase in the probability of a preceding response will be repeated in the future. For example, if you have an itchy rash, which is an unpleasant stimulus that is relieved when you apply a certain brand of ointment, you are more likely to use that ointment the next time you have an itchy rash. Using the ointment then is negatively reinforcing because it removes the unpleasant itch. Similarly, if your iPod volume is so loud that it hurts your ears when you first turn it on, you are likely to reduce the volume. Lowering the volume is negatively reinforcing, and you are more apt to repeat the action in the future when you first turn it on. Negative reinforcement then teaches the individual that taking an action removes a negative condition that exists in the environment. Like positive reinforcers, negative reinforcers increase the likelihood that preceding behaviors will be repeated. Please note, negative reinforcement is not the same thing as punishment. Punishment refers to a stimulus that decreases the probability that a prior behavior will occur again. Unlike negative reinforcement, which produces an increase in behavior, punishment reduces the likelihood of a prior response. If we receive a shock that is meant to decrease a certain behavior, then we are receiving punishment. But if we are already receiving a shock and do something to stop that shock, the behavior that stops the shock is considered to be negatively reinforced. In the first case, a specific behavior is apt to decrease because of the punishment. In the second, it is likely to increase because of the negative reinforcement. So, there are two types of punishment: positive punishment and negative punishment. Just as there are positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. In both cases, positive means adding something and negative means removing something. So, positive punishment weakens a response through the application of an unpleasant stimulus. In contrast, negative punishment consists of the removal of something pleasant. For instance, when a teenager is told she is grounded and will no longer be able to use the family car because of her poor grades, or when an employee is informed that he has been demoted with a cut in pay because of poor job performance, negative punishment is being administered. Both positive and negative punishment result in a decrease in the likelihood that a prior behavior will be repeated. The following rules can help you distinguish these concepts from one another. Reinforcement increases the frequency of the behavior preceding it, and punishment decreases the frequency of the behavior preceding it. The application of a positive stimulus brings about an increase in the frequency of behavior and is referred to as positive reinforcement. The application of a negative stimulus decreases or reduces the frequency of behavior and is called punishment. The removal of a negative stimulus that results in an increase in the frequency of behavior is negative reinforcement. The removal of a positive stimulus that decreases the frequency of behavior is negative. So remember, punishment decreases the probability that a prior behavior will occur. Positive punishment weakens a response through the application of an unpleasant stimulus, whereas negative punishment weakens a response by the removal of something positive. In contrast to reinforcement, in which the goal is to increase the incidence of behavior, punishment is meant to decrease or suppress behavior. Schedules and patterns of reinforcement affect the strength of duration of learning. Generally, partly reinforcement schedules, in which reinforcers are not delivered on every trial. It produces stronger and longer lasting learning than do continuous reinforcement schedules. Among the major categories of reinforcement schedules are fixed and variable ratio schedules, which are based on the number of responses made. The fixed and variable interval schedules, which are based on the time interval that lapses before reinforcement is provided. Now, stimulus control training, which is similar to stimulus discrimination in classical conditioning, is reinforcement of a behavior in which the presence of a specific stimulus, but not in its absence. In stimulus generalization, an organism learns a response to one stimulus and then exhibits the same response to slightly different stimuli. Shaping is a process for teaching complex behaviors by rewarding closer and closer approximations of the desired final behavior. There are biological constraints or built-in limitations on the ability of an organism to learn. Certain behaviors will be relatively easy for individuals of a species to learn, whereas other behaviors will be either difficult or impossible for them to learn. And one more thing, behavior modification is a method for formally using the principles of learning theory to promote the frequency of desired behaviors and to decrease or eliminate unwanted behaviors.